The House resumes its business. The member from Prospect speaking.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prior to the short break, I think I was extending my applause and thanks both to the Minister of Finance and his dedicated team for what I consider their fiscal prudence and for presenting another budget that we, the people of the Cayman Islands, can all be proud of, not just on the government bench, Mr. Speaker, but also presenting a budget that remains compliant with both the principles of the public management and finance law and the framework for fiscal responsibility. I was also giving, praise and accolades to the Premier, the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, and I want to restate, Mr. Speaker, I know that in this referendum process, as we talked about during the referendum debate, the whole question and criticisms have gone past just seeking more information, but have gotten very personal, become a referendum on the government, and in worst cases, in some extreme cases, even a referendum on the leadership of this government. I want to state wholeheartedly, Mr. Speaker, as someone who in a former life used to criticize everybody, that the Premier, the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, he is not only the best choice to lead this coalition government of national unity, but he's the best choice to lead this country. And in my opinion, he is good not only for this government, but also for Caymanians. And I believe the personal attacks and criticism at a personal level are completely unwarranted, and we're better than that. To quote an old Virginia Slims ad, Mr. Speaker, we've come a long way, baby, from the days of austerity, having to seek approval from the United Kingdom before taking every step in charting our future as Caymanians and certainly as a government. But likewise, I have to thank the United Kingdom for working with the government, both the former administration and the current one, in which I'm honored to be a part of, which has enabled us to say proudly that the Cayman Islands has learnt some valuable lessons, and from those valuable lessons, we now find ourselves in an even stronger financial position than ever before, and one that is once again the envy of much of the developed world. I'm proud of that. You heard me say in my referendum bill debate that I long for the days when the Cayman Islands are leaders in the region again. Well, those days are here, and those days are coming, and those days, by all intentions and indications, are going to be around for a while. This national unity government, Mr. Speaker, continues to demonstrate its ability to put in place a strong and sustainable fiscal policy, and have demonstrated the fortitude to stick to its plans, despite the sometimes criticism that comes with it, to arrive at this point where we all, as Caymanians, can be proud of our little islands which continue to be blessed by the hands of the Almighty. But as they say, heaven helps those who help themselves, Mr. Speaker. And to that end, the government of national unity have been good stewards of the public purse and will continue to do so, Mr. Speaker, over the course of the next 2 years, or whatever we have left. Mr. Speaker, the member from Northside gave some criticisms as it relates to the anticipated surplus that the Honorable Minister of Finance has presented in his budget, and against what he describes as the needs of our people. Well, let me state categorically that I got a lot of time for the member from Northside. I work with him on the Public Accounts Committee, and I can state without fear of contradiction that he does a fantastic job. He holds everyone to account, and his only intention is that we arrive at being the best we can be. And yes, maybe a little rough around the edges sometimes, but he means well. He means well. He means well. But I want to address his concerns in two parts. Certainly his concerns about the needs of our people, I will address in a few moments. But he also, in his conversation, asked the question, he wonders who pays the insurance for the port. Well, if I may draw a parallel between his question of insurance for the port and the budget surplus, we should consider the budget surpluses which the Minister of Finance and his team have so carefully made sure is maintained as our insurance in the Cayman Islands against external shocks. Shocks such as a recession. There's been talks, anybody listening to the financial news, CNN, BBC, there is an anticipation that there would be a potential recession in the middle of next year. This will potentially result in a downturn in the revenue that we receive from our major trading partners in North America. What happens if there is a major hurricane? This surplus, which may seem like a lot of money, will disappear quickly, and certainly we talk about the ever-increasing threat to financial services. Certainly you are aware, Mr. Speaker, we are aware of the EU, the CFATF, the constant moving of the goalposts. What happens to the day when they move the goalposts so far to a point that we're not prepared to match it? Then what happens? The Ministry of Community Affairs, as I explained earlier this month, spending $25.5 million on social welfare, $25.5 million going to our people by the end of 2019. Surplus of $63 million. That'll get eaten up real quick, real fast, if the worst happens. So, just like the old-time Caymanians taught us, we earn a little, we save a little, but we don't spend everything we make. We save a little for that rainy day. And that surplus is insurance against those external shocks that we have no control over, Mr. Speaker, but it provides us that safety net. That's fiscal prudence, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad we have it. Before, Mr. Speaker, I seek to share some further details as to just how the government's planned expenditure will benefit the wider Cayman Islands as outlined in the 2020-2021 budget. Please allow me this opportunity to provide an update with regard to what I describe as the phenomenal progress that has been achieved for the constituents and residents of Prospect, of whom I was elected to represent. While, Mr. Speaker, we each have a national responsibility role to play, it first begins with local representation in our respective constituencies. As such, Mr. Speaker, please allow me this opportunity to express to my constituents in Prospect just how public expenditure has been used to improve their lives from 2017 to the present date. As I said, much has been accomplished in Prospect. Things like major road resurfacing along Mangrove Avenue, Buttonwood, and Shamrock Road from the Tomlinson Roundabout all the way up to Orchid Heights, which I might add have not only benefited Prospect, but others east of Prospect. We've had a number of minor but much needed road improvements, such as pothole repairs, drain clearances, and in some cases, even new drains dug in places such as Marina Drive, Mangrove Avenue, Mahogany Way, Orange Drive, Spots Newlands, and Raven Avenue. We were successful, Mr. Speaker, in removing the tall hedges along the Rex Crichton Boulevard. That is, of course, the east-west arterial, which provided a hindrance not only to road users in general, but in particular created visibility challenges for residents of Paradise Palms, more commonly known as the Frank Hall development. And by replacing those hedges, Mr. Speaker, with a guardrail to better protect residents along Adventure Street, Cloudscape Crescent, and Quartz. We have seen improved lighting in areas that include Bonneview, the east-west arterial, and Bedrock Circle, all of which have been accomplished in collaboration with the NRA, or National Roads Authority, of whom I am eternally grateful, and who have also assisted in regular grass cutting along the major roadways of Prospect to keep things looking nice and tidy. You know, we have heard some of the Deputy Governor's world-class civil service referred to in a derogatory manner, but if I may seek to return some luster to their efforts, because they do work hard, the civil servants, and I want to pay special attention to those who have worked very hard in assisting us in Prospect, Mr. Edward Howard and Brian Chinyi, as well as the new chairman of the NRA, Mr. John Edward Ebanks, and certainly, last but certainly not least, the Minister himself of Commerce, Planning, and Infrastructure. Speaking to those who I am grateful for, particularly in the Prospect context, let me also thank the dedicated team of the Prospect Red Bay Community Group, led by Ms. Sabrina Turner, who, with the assistance of residents, as well as members of the Young Pathfinders Club, which are an arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, have collaborated several times on garbage cleanups in the community to keep both Red Bay and Prospect as clean as possible. Likewise, my thanks for collaboration go to the Department of Environmental Health, Mr. Richard Sims in particular, and the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service Community Officer Christopher Donaldson for helping to keep Prospect free of both derelict vehicles as well as ensuring safer streets for our citizens, their children and families to enjoy. And lastly, also to the DEH for working with me to install over 11 no littering signs from Selkirk Drive to Spots Newlands Road in an attempt to change the culture that seems to have been adopted by so many to simply just throw their trash out their windows as they drive rather than saving it and putting it in a necessary receptacle. We have not accomplished these things on our own, Mr. Speaker, but instead, as you have heard, in partnership with Red Bay, proving again that the Premier and I appear to work very well together. And I'm grateful for those things, Mr. Speaker. As I noted in the referendum bill, Prospect is doing just fine, exactly according to plans. Much has been accomplished, and more is on the way over the course of these next 2 years. Included in the budget for 2020 and 2021 will include more road works. We have the resurfacing of Orange Drive, which will be a hot mix resurfacing on a road that is in dire need of repair. We have the development of a new community park for both Red Bay and Prospect, for which residents have been presented with concept designs, and we've even gotten the Prospect Red Bay Community Group as a nonprofit organization legally to run that entity once it is developed. There will be improvements to the Cecile Crichton Community Park, which I might add will be achieved not through taxpayer support, Mr. Speaker, but instead in collaboration with the private sector and members of the Rotary Central Club. Those works are underway and have been underway for some time, and I hope to make an announcement shortly in that regard to the constituents of Prospect as to what they can expect. And also the Prospect Primary School, Mr. Speaker, will be the benefactors of not only a school bus, I'm told, by the end of November, which will assist parents getting their children to and from school with greater convenience, but will also lend itself to mitigating against some of the excess traffic by reducing the number of vehicles on the road at the one time. We're looking forward to that new school bus being provided to the Prospect Primary by the end of November. And likewise, new AstroTurf is expected to be laid on their school field. That is anticipated by the end of December this year. For that, I wish to extend my thanks to the Honourable Minister of Education for working with me to make this a reality. The National Unity Government working together to achieve much for our people, Mr. Speaker. And that is the point of my message, Mr. Speaker. It is to acknowledge that as the Leader of the Opposition has opined, yes, the government is spending money, but it is spending that money on our people, Mr. Speaker. Turning my attention now, Mr. Speaker, to the wider public interest. While the Premier spoke about the important achievements in labor as they relate to unemployment, most notably the significant drop in Caymanian unemployment, which has gone from a high of 10.5% in 2013 to 4.8% according to the most recent labor force survey. That represents a decrease in Caymanian unemployment by more than half, Mr. Speaker, or 54% to be precise, taking us to the levels which is often referred to in larger developed countries as structural unemployment, which suggests that despite the jobs available on the open market, there still yet appears to be a mismatch in the skills of what companies require as compared to the skills in which our available workers possess. To address this, Mr. Speaker, the government continues to fine-tune its skill training workshops to include a broader focus on vocational skills through a variety of both programs facilitated by both the public and private sectors. However, I think the important takeaway in these unemployment figures is that just over 95% of all working age Caymanians are gainfully employed. That's good news, Mr. Speaker. It's not 100%, but we are actively and diligently working towards that ambitious goal. No other country in this developed world can claim 100% employment. But we in the Cayman Islands have set that as our target. Why? Because we believe it is achievable. The best-in-class jurisdiction in terms of employment rate in this world is Iceland, with 86.3 employment rate as of 2016. In comparison, we already see at 95% employment amongst Caymanians that we have the ability to be head and shoulders over the rest. So I say yes, Mr. Speaker, we will aim high, we will strive harder, and we will work towards accomplishing our goals of seeing 100% employment amongst Caymanians by the end of our administration. Because we believe it is achievable. But make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, it will take all of us to achieve it. And in particular, it will take the remaining 4.8% taking full advantage of the opportunities that are made available. That means not just only registering themselves with work, the Workforce Opportunity and Residency Cayman, but making sure they enroll themselves in the various vocational and training programs that seek to upskill themselves so they become more marketable and more attractive to those jobs that are available on the market. And in some cases, it may require taking a job that may be less than what you otherwise think you deserve. But a job is better than no job. And there are jobs available. We just have to be able to embrace it. We've heard from the Deputy Premier, Honorable Minister of Tourism, state that despite our best efforts, we have not been able to encourage Caymanians to participate in hospitality as it relates to the stayover tourism in a meaningful way. But yet we see as much as 80% Caymanian participation in the cruise sector. There are those who would seek to take that away and jettison 4,500 Caymanians to the unemployment line. Not this government, Mr. Speaker. We want to maintain those jobs in cruise tourism, and we want to encourage our Caymanians to take advantage of the opportunities that wait for them in stayover tourism. If they did, sir, this 4.8% in Caymanian unemployment would disappear. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker. The rethink of labor distribution brought about by this administration, which lent itself to the design of the new Department of Workforce Opportunities and Residency Cayman, or WORC for short, has, for the first time in our country's history, created the capacity within government to strategically develop our available workforce to meet the demands of future jobs as our economy and our country continues to grow. Again, we heard from the member from Northside suggesting that in his view, work should not have to deal with work permits, status, and PR, but instead it should focus on the challenges and opportunities related to labor and those things that are keeping Caymanians out of jobs. We all accept in some way or the other that many jobs go to the foreign work permit holder that a Caymanian could or should occupy. When we say that work will for the first time allow us to strategically develop our workforce, what does that mean? That means, Mr. Speaker, that if we know we have 5 Caymanian students getting ready to graduate university in the end of 2020, 2021, in the areas of finance, in the areas of tourism, in the areas of law, then perhaps there are 4 or 5 work permits that are already existing in the industry that are preparing to expire that need not be renewed so that we can replace those jobs with qualified Caymanians. Well, the member from Northside is suggesting that we take a retrograde step backwards, hand off the responsibility of approving work permits to some other department, which in government they're notorious for operating in silos. So that other department will keep that information silent and private, but never talk to the work department who's trying to get Caymanians into jobs, and nothing will change. Strategic development of our workforce to take us into the future. That is what work seeks to do, and that is what the new design will be working to accomplish. And when combined, Mr. Speaker, with the new Fair Employment Opportunities Commission, which is slated to be introduced in the new year and will be empowered to look at the treatment of Caymanians at all levels, in all sectors, to ensure that any barriers or impediments to advancement or upward mobility are removed, then I believe, Mr. Speaker, we can achieve our ambitious goals of seeing unemployment, particularly amongst Caymanians, drop, opportunities for Caymanians for upward mobility increase, and certainly when combined with the discounts, reductions in fees and stamp duty and otherwise, more and more Caymanians owning a piece of the rock. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, much work has been done in the past 2 years to advance the conversation and review of the national minimum wage. And moving forward in 2020 and 2021, we will seek to continue this effort by engaging with private sector partners who, I believe in truth, they provide the jobs that are necessary. But I also believe if they're honest, they will also admit that wage levels have tended to lag behind productivity and growth in our economy. And if we all want the same thing, and that is to see Cayman succeed, and to see it succeed with Caymanians, then we need to take a look at wages. And we have nothing to fear from a possible increase to the national minimum wage, Mr. Speaker, as we have seen growth continue and thousands of new jobs created despite the introduction of a national minimum wage in the first place, which is contrary to the doomsayers and the gloomy predictions that were made when we were considering a national minimum wage for this country. Oh, business would fly away. Oh, there'd be more terminations. Oh, unemployment would be greater. None of those things happened, Mr. Speaker, but instead just the opposite. Our economy has grown. Jobs have been created. Business is flourishing. Much has been accomplished, Mr. Speaker, in these past 2.5 years. But we haven't achieved these things alone. And again, I wish to acknowledge the hard work of what I have found to be a world-class civil service. I hear a lot of grief that our civil servants pick up. I have not experienced that in my 2.5 years in the ministries in which I share responsibility for, and certainly in the Ministry of Employment and Border Control. We have a solid, dedicated, hardworking, and committed team who want what I want, Mr. Speaker, to see this country go from good to great to best. As such, I would like to express my thanks to the team leader, the Chief Officer of the Ministry of Employment and Border Control, Mr. Wesley Howell, who in recent times has seen his duties transition back into his supervisor of elections role. But in the meantime, the Deputy Chief Officer, now Acting Chief Officer, Mr. Michael Ebanks, has been doing a stellar job. He has been supported by now Acting Deputy Chief Officer, but otherwise Senior Policy Advisor, Ms. Debbie Ann Whitaker, and Ms. Sharon Ralston over at Work. And the teams that they lead, which many persons, too many to mention by name, but they all have done phenomenal work in the last 2 years in this change management exercise, and they should be congratulated. Turning my attention now, Mr. Speaker, to the Ministry of Community Affairs, who has oversight for the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS, and the Needs Assessment Unit, NAU, Gender and housing repairs assistance program, all of which we've heard discussed here this evening in one form or the other. This ministry, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Community Affairs, continues to play an essential role throughout the Cayman Islands, and I am proud to be the councillor responsible. I volunteered for it. The ministry has an overarching purpose to empower people and enhance lives. To empower people and enhance lives. And these entities, the DCFS, NAU, continue to focus on our most vulnerable, Mr. Speaker, by advocating for and protecting our children, our seniors, and supporting families on a whole. In addition to having oversight responsibility for the departments mentioned, namely DCFS, NAU, gender, housing repairs, the Ministry of Community Affairs also continues to support a number of non-profit organizations, or NPOs, such as the Keys Foundation, who provide the Bonaventure Boys Home and the Fairbanks Girls Home. Meals on Wheels, who are committed to enhancing the lives of seniors and the infirmed through daily delivery of hot, nutritious meals, and as they say, a meal and a smile. To some people, to some of their visits, they're the only other human contact that they see. Is that not important, Mr. Speaker? I think it is. In total, some over 40,000 meals in all 5 districts of Grand Cayman are delivered as a result of this Meals on Wheels program. The NCVO, Mr. Speaker, the National Council for Voluntary Organizations, who I think either just did or are about to have their national telethon, but they do some important work. The Rehoboth Ministries. There you go. The Rehoboth Ministries, who provide essential after-school enrichment programs. The Pines Retirement Home, and of course the Crisis Center. All of these departments and programs receive funding and support from the Ministry of Community Affairs. Before speaking on some of the highlights included in the 2020-2021 budget, allow me to outline some of the ministry's achievements in both 2018 and 2019. Because I hear these claims, Mr. Speaker, by some in this House and many without, that suggest that enough isn't being done to help our people. And, well, I challenge those situations. And certainly if you have identifiable cases of persons who are in need of help and are not being assisted, I would be anxious to know it. Because what I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, and others in this House, is whilst there are many who apply, regrettably, some do not meet the criteria. But every individual who has an identifiable need, whilst they may not receive exactly what they apply for, they receive something in form of assistance, whether it be from the bodies, the ministries that are charged with this responsibility, or it is the members that make up this government who regularly, out of their own pocket, out of my pocket, do I provide food vouchers, utility assistance, wherever we can be of assistance. So don't tell me that this government and those that may have come before it, though I can't speak for them, are not helping those. And in particular, you cannot tell me, and I will prove it today, that the Ministry of Community Affairs is not helping those in need. In 2018, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Children and Family Services embarked on an organizational restructuring to transform the service delivery model and acquired additional resources to deliver preventative interventions, youth diversion programs, and introduced gerontology, which is the process of aging, the scientific process of aging, and determining the challenges and problems associated with our aging population. This has been supported by the Council for Older Persons, who have made a number of recommendations that will benefit older persons in the community, with the government accepting and making a commitment. Things like the reduction in fees on import duty, bank fees, specialized older person queues at banks and other service providers, more designated parking at supermarkets and the like, ensuring adequate and affordable health care through insurance, just to name a few. Are we there yet? No. Are there more recommendations available? Of course there are. There's always more that can be done, but do not tell me that we are not helping, Mr. Speaker, because that is simply not true. In 2019, work commenced on a draft national child safeguarding policy to advance child safeguarding policies and protocols to maintain a safe environment that supports the development and the welfare of children. Also, between 2018 and 2019, work began on identifying and developing a new facility for children with disabilities. And the procurement for this facility took place in 2018-2019, which will be housed in the Northwood area, and I believe that is in the Boddentown West constituency, if I'm not mistaken. And it is anticipated that this facility will be completed by the end of the 2019 budget year. The Gender Affairs Unit, Mr. Speaker, or GAU, continues to promote gender equality and provide awareness of the Gender Equalities Law and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW for short, through training and communication. The GAU is also represented in the newly established Alliance to End Domestic Violence, which is chaired by the Cayman Islands Crisis Center, whose purpose is to help develop a coordinated process to support all people affected by domestic violence, which includes both men and women, and to educate the wider public on how domestic violence impacts the whole of society. Again, this is against the backdrop of the government apparently failing to provide services for our people. In 2018 and 2019, Mr. Speaker, the Needs Assessment Unit, or NAU, provided over 1,000 families, not individuals, families, with permanent financial assistance. Over 1,100 families with temporary financial assistance in areas including rental assistance, utility allowance, food vouchers, and have also conducted over 500 financial assessments for indigent medical coverage. People who are sick, that cannot afford to take care of themselves. Do we tell them, sorry, we can't help you? No. It also implemented a direct deposit scheme, Mr. Speaker, to assist landlords enrolled in the rental program to ensure timely receipt of monthly rental payments. Yes, the government can go and develop housing to accommodate all of those who are without homes. But how does that benefit the economy? How do we spread this wealth and success of the government across as many hands as possible? Well, whilst there are Caymanians who may not have traditionally saved in the traditional method, what we have done is we built apartments. And those apartments either become rental income when we retire, or they supplement our income whilst we are still of working age. Those homes, Mr. Speaker, are the ones that the government seeks to partnership with to provide clients, which the government guarantees X amount of funding in order to go towards their monthly rent. They complained, Mr. Speaker, that the checks weren't arriving on time. I argue that their government checks, they're not going to bounce, so whether they're a week late or 2 weeks late, the money is good. But I take their point. Their banks don't care. They want their money on the 1st and the 31st of every month. So we had an obligation to do better. What did we do? We're in the 21st century. We all receive money through direct deposit. Half in this room are on online banking. The other half, as the member from Northside, have their 5-year-olds doing it for them. But he's on online banking, thanks to his daughters. We can do that for those persons who are providing roofs over the heads of our people who have none. We have made efforts, Mr. Speaker. Most notably, Mr. Speaker, as has been highlighted by the Premier, under the stewardship of this national unity government, we have increased by a whopping 73% the monthly payment of permanent financial assistance payments to our most vulnerable and hard-pressed households across all 7 districts that make up the Cayman Islands. That represents, Mr. Speaker, an increase in monthly allotments from $550 a month when we first took office to, by the end of 2019, $750 per month. As of January 2020, that amount will increase to $850 per month. And again, by January 2021, it will increase to $950 per month. Ensuring that as we grow, as earnings grow, and where expenditure goes, that expenditure goes back to those most vulnerable. Yes, not everyone who applies succeeds. What I've learned, and this is a harsh reality, what they tell you is the problem and why they got denied usually isn't why they got denied. There's a financial assessment process that is fair. It is not favoring one or the other, but it is to ensure that what you tell me matches what your earnings are or are not, because there is a limitation on the funds available. So we try to ensure that those who do receive the help genuinely need it. But as I said before, Mr. Speaker, only in the very rarest circumstances, and again, I've been doing this job for 2.5 years, I spend most of my time working with the Ministry of Community Affairs. Even those who fail to meet the criteria and may not get 100% of rental assistance receive something. Maybe it's utility assistance, maybe it's food vouchers, maybe it's cynical health coverage, something to help, Mr. Speaker. In 2019, Mr. Speaker, the Needs Assessment Unit commenced a project to improve the functionality of the unit's database. That is to ensure that adequate and responsive assistance is more readily available to the most vulnerable and to improve overall service delivery. Now, I will admit, do I think we answer the phones fast enough? Do I think we are as compassionate as we need to be when persons are perhaps at their lowest? No, we don't always achieve that, Mr. Speaker. But as you will see in the financial statements and breakdowns, and I will mention later on, that we have increased the headcount by ways of increasing these resources that these oftentimes overstretched departments require. But we don't just place bodies in open spaces, sir, but we move bodies, in particular in NAU, with qualified social workers. So a social worker understands the challenges of those persons struggling in poverty, understands the challenges of those persons struggling with substance abuse or otherwise, and it provides a human touch of understanding that, again, is hard to criticize. We've also engaged in a recruitment that will assist in hiring compliance and operations managers that will assist with internal and external compliance, as well as to handle cases of fraud and misuse of NAU services. Yes, it is the taxpayers' money. Yes, we agree on a budget, but we have to manage that money, and we have to ensure that those who receive it are entitled to it and deserve it. Otherwise, my colleagues on that side, the members of the Auditor General's office, through the PAs, through the Public Accounts Committee and otherwise, they will remind us where we've misstepped. But we've taken careful steps, Mr. Speaker, to address the transparency concern, the good governance concern, but above all, the human concern of helping those who cannot help themselves. Do not tell me this government has not helped people, Mr. Speaker. I will not accept it. Members will note on the budget documents, particularly for the Needs Assessment Unit, a subtle yet distinct change in the manner in which temporary services are amalgamated. Expenditure, for example, for rent, food vouchers, preschool assistance, school uniforms, burial assistance, utility assistance, are now represented as one expenditure group for temporary assistance. And I know members have raised this question, at least one has raised it with me. I suspect others will as well. But this change to the structure of the appropriations, Mr. Speaker, as contained in the 2020 and 2021 budget, will allow the unit greater flexibility to meet the demands and the needs of their clients in a timely manner. Oftentimes we're criticized, yes, you give them the service, but it takes so long for the rent check to come, takes so long for the utility check to come. By allowing the unit flexibility to distribute funds as needed, improves the service to those who most need it, and makes it more efficient, which is an area of some concern for existing clients. Also, Mr. Speaker, this minor yet important change will also streamline requests for services without the ministry having to constantly return to this legislative assembly to request either supplementary funding or to make transfer payments from one area where we anticipated to spend money, but that project has been languishing, so we can transfer it over to, say, the NAU Temporary Financial Assistance Program, which is overburdened. Under the system that exists right now, we have to bring those matters to the Legislative Assembly for approval before we can have the money to spend it. Well, which do you want? Do you want your clients and your constituents who are in need of assistance to receive it when they are in need? Or do you want to receive the monies 3, 4, 6 months until they receive approval from the Legislative Assembly? Which one? The member is waiting for me to call his name or to acknowledge his constituency, which, well, I won't bite this time. The budget, Mr. Speaker, for the Housing Repairs Assistance Program has remained consistent with the original approved budget for 2018 and 2019, which in those fiscal years allowed for 7 housing projects to be completed in Grand Cayman and included 2 projects each in West Bay and in East End, and 1 project each in Georgetown, Northside, and Bordentown. That's 2018-2019. But as many will recall, the program received a significant boost, an uplift in supplementary funding earlier in this year of some $1.6 million, which enabled the government, Mr. Speaker, to facilitate an unprecedented 35 housing repair projects in a single calendar year. I've asked the ministry to tell me which government, at which time, past or present, have completed that many housing repairs in a single calendar year, and they can't tell me they have. Again, proof positive, Mr. Speaker, that this government of national unity is spending money, but it is spending money on our people. The member from Northside raised an issue of a home in his constituency that was previously on that approved list of some 35 homes. I will accept that is the case. I will also accept that the quality of due diligence in that circumstance, and of course, it always takes a first time to give you an idea, teach you a lesson that maybe you could improve your service delivery. This was that one time. And he is absolutely correct. He came to me, he raised the concerns. I didn't take his word for it, though I had no reason to doubt him. But I did conduct my own research and found the claims that he made were accurate. And I agree with him. Government cannot be seen to be repairing a home for someone who is otherwise a convicted criminal at the expense of persons who are in genuine need. As we acknowledge, there's only so much funds, it can only go so far, and we stretch it as best as we can. But what the member fails to understand is that whilst the project was previously approved and works had commenced by the government before we recognized the background and naturally had it stopped, the government has an obligation to replace that which it removed. So whether the government took off one shingle or an entire side of the house, what the government have committed to doing in that instance, there is no question here, Mr. Speaker. This is a fact. What the government has committed to doing is replacing that which it removed, and it'll stop there. So the total rebuild that would have been otherwise afforded this individual under the previous application, which was approved under fraudulent circumstances, will not proceed.
Mr. Speaker,
But we
on
will.
a point of order, the member is
This is the point of order.
the member is misrepresenting what I said, and I need to clarify it. When I reported the matter to the member from Bordentown, the zinc had been removed from the eastern side of one of the small roofs, covered by a small blue container, tarpaulin. Since that, they removed the whole roof and they replaced the whole roof. I can bring you the pictures tomorrow morning to show you, and I will.
Mr. Speaker, what I can say to the member, and he's been in communication with myself, the ministry, chief officer, and others on this. They paid a visit to the site, but this is the information that I've received. This is the understanding in which I'm the counselor, the minister responsible has accepted to be genuine, and the agreement is such that the government will replace that which the government removed, but no more. Overall, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned in my contribution on the referendum, some $25.5 million will be spent by the Ministry of Community Affairs for the fiscal year of 2019. Looking ahead to 2020, 2021, the government has allocated approximately another $26 million in each fiscal year to be spent on the ministry's programs that benefit the most vulnerable. Certainly 2019 was identified as on the rather high end, and we're spending $25.5 million, so certainly $26 million should be sufficient over the next 2 years. But of course, there's flexibility. Plans change, forecasts change, and we've provided, as I've explained to members, the flexibility in the budgeting process to allow the Needs Assessment Unit, the Ministry of Community Affairs, to distribute social welfare to those who need it the most. In both 2020 and 2021, we will continue to build resilience while also adding to our necessary headcount in all oversight bodies, including the Needs Assessment Unit. We will increase the headcount in the NAU by 1, with 1 more additional needs assessment officer to cope with the amount of requests for services. In the Department of Children and Family Services, or DCFS, the headcount will increase by 6, which is primarily attributable to the additional community care worker posts. And we've increased the headcount by 1 in the Gender Affairs Unit to provide for an additional policy analyst. With the recent restructuring of the Department of Children and Family Services in 2018 and 2019, I'm pleased to announce that the specialized teams that were promised in the first budget presented by this government have in fact been achieved and established, and will continue to focus on key and essential areas of which I've already outlined to members. In 2020, we anticipate the opening and operation of the special needs residential facility for children, the expansion of the Gender Affairs Unit, and continued support for nonprofit organizations who have made significant contributions to our community. And again, we are pleased to consistently contribute to their overall budget. From a legislative and policy standpoint, Mr. Speaker, we will continue our planned revisions and modernizations to include the Adoptions Law, the Children's Law, the Financial Assistance Law, which will replace the Poor Persons Law, and the National Child Safeguarding Policy. Mr. Speaker, as the Leader of the Opposition questioned in his contribution the closure of the East End Sunrise Cottage, I will acknowledge he's correct. That facility was closed mid-2019 as it was no longer fit for purpose for the residents, 6 in total, who were moved to the Golden Age home in West Bay, where their needs and safety could be better met. And we've also received the support for this move from those 6 persons and their families. So again, if there are objections on this, I haven't heard it. At the moment, the ministry is exploring 2 options, Mr. Speaker. First, consideration is being given to renovate and continue to utilize the existing East End Cottage for day programs and services. Secondly, we are in the process of exploring a purpose-built facility, not only for use of the existing clientele, but also to accommodate the future growth and needs of our aging population. While we appreciate the concerns raised by the Leader of the Opposition, again, he too participated in this exercise as it relates to the East End Cottage. He, the Chief Officer, and myself visited the site. We explained and outlined what options were being explored. To teach is to repeat, so I repeat those things which the Leader of the Opposition would otherwise already know. We can assure the Leader of the Opposition, all members of this House, that suitable options are being considered and explored in the best interest of our seniors. However, Mr. Speaker, we cannot be hasty in our approach, but instead we must assess and plan to meet our long-term needs. And of course, the member of East End will be kept informed of any progress that is made in this regard, as this facility does exist in his constituency. In closing, Mr. Speaker, undoubtedly the efforts of the Ministry of Community Affairs are of significant importance, and it has been my honor and privilege to work on a daily basis with the committed team of professionals that make up that ministry as part of our world-class civil service. I would like to single out Chief Officer Ms. Teresa Echeniki, who continues to acclimate herself in her by now not-so-new posting. I also wish to recognize Mr. Andre Ebanks, who served as Deputy Chief Officer for a time before advancing on as Cayman's representative in London and doing another fine job there. While he was in his post, he made considerable strides in improving the number of homes repaired under the Housing Repairs Assistance Program, and in large part enabled us to achieve this unprecedented number of 35 homes repaired in a single calendar year. I also wish to formally welcome Ms. Joan Dakers-West as the new incoming Deputy Chief Officer. I likewise thank Mrs. Paulinda Mendoza-Williams from the Department of Children and Family Services, Ms. Tamara Holston and Mr. Matthew Hilton from the Needs Assessment Unit for their dedication and unfailing commitment to Cayman's most vulnerable. I would also likewise be remiss if I also did not recognize and thank the Older Persons Council, led by former MLA Ms. Lucille Seymour, for the important work she and her team have continued to do to progress the interests of senior citizens in our country. It has very much been a team effort, Mr. Speaker. And Rael Roberts, thank you. Also, the new member of the Department of Children and Family Services, acclimating himself very well from the private sector. We're delighted to see this many concerned and capable Caymanians agreeing to come over, professional Caymanians coming over to the public service to deliver services to our people. We're enthusiastic, Mr. Future, about the next 2 years. Again, the budget that has been laid out by the Minister of Finance and presented by the Premier is a strong budget, one that places this country in a strong position to see our economy grow, to see our revenue grow, to see major infrastructure projects finally come out of the ground. And yes, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that those most vulnerable and hard-pressed households are not left by the wayside, but are in fact assisted to the best possible level that this government can achieve. I just want to say one quick update on traffic, Mr. Speaker, particularly in the constituency of Prospect, as was agreed upon unanimously in this House earlier this year in a private member's motion, moved by myself and seconded by the member from Georgetown West. Excuse me. The committee established to look into standards on vehicle imports and transportation has been established. We've had a number of productive meetings. We are preparing to get to the stage of the public engagement, stakeholder engagement, where we take our recommendations to the airwaves, the newspapers, the print, the social media, members of the opposition, everyone who travel our roads to get their opinions on some of these recommendations. I will admit and acknowledge, however, those plans have been delayed, not postponed, but delayed in order to allow for the referendum conversation and the debates on both sides to continue, lest otherwise we be criticized for seeking to talk about other subjects and distracting from the referendum. This government has done everything possible to recognize the referendum the 5,000 plus signatures who signed the referendum. They requested a referendum be timely. We presented a law, presented a date, presented a question. We have not delayed, Mr. Speaker. And again, in order to ensure that fairness is in fact the order of the day, that a person's wishes and their viewpoints are respected, we have decided to delay the stakeholder engagement discussions on traffic congestion, on vehicle importation, until after the referendum has ended, which unfortunately will take us past December and into the new year, so I will not be able to present those recommendations to government by the end of this year, as was the plan, I think, in May of this year. But they will continue to happen, and like I said, that committee is doing some very positive work, and I'm anxious to get their recommendations in the public realm. But I wanted to report to this House the work of that committee, which this House authorized in the first instance. Mr. Speaker, this concludes my contribution to this 2020-2021 budget debate. I ask members to consider it, to debate it, to acknowledge the virtue and the opportunity contained in it for all of us, and ultimately to support it when that time comes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your time, as always, sir. And certainly, God bless the constituents of Prospect and the wider Cayman Islands.
Call on the Honorable Deputy Premier for the adjournment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the adjournment of this Honorable House till 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Question is that this Honorable Legislative Assembly do not adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. All in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.